There is something happening in European trucking right now that most people in the United States are not paying attention to, and that is a mistake. Because what unfolds over the next 12 to 18 months on European highways could determine whether electric trucking becomes the permanent future of global freight, or whether it remains a promising experiment that never quite scaled. Tesla Semi is entering Europe, and Europe is not America. To understand why this matters, you need to forget everything you think you know about how Tesla Semi has performed so far. The American experience, the PepsiCo routes in California, the Frito-Lay deliveries, the Texas efficiency tests, all of that was essentially a controlled environment. Friendly customers, familiar regulations, a company operating on its home turf. Europe is something else entirely. It is the world's largest diesel-dominated trucking market, and it does not have any particular reason to welcome a newcomer from Nevada. Here is the number that sets the stage. 93.2% of all new truck registrations in the European Union in 2025 were diesel, not hybrid, not hydrogen, not electric, diesel. Despite years of climate legislation, despite billions in green subsidies, despite aggressive emissions targets, 9 out of every 10 new heavy trucks sold in Europe still ran on a fuel that was invented in the 19th century. That is not a market in transition. That is a fortress. And Tesla Semi just decided to knock on the gate. Volume production of Tesla Semi officially began on April 29, 2026, at a dedicated facility in Nevada with a stated capacity of 50,000 trucks per year. As of now, approximately 200 units have been delivered to customers globally, the vast majority in the United States. Tesla has confirmed that a European version is coming, adapted to local regulations, with the first homologated units expected later in 2026. The company appointed a head of business development for the EMEA region in June 2025, a signal that the European push is no longer theoretical. It is happening. The question is whether the market is ready for Tesla and whether Tesla is ready for the market. To appreciate the scale of the challenge, you need to understand what makes European trucking structurally different from American trucking. And the differences go much deeper than voltage standards or steering wheel placement. Start with weight. In the United States, standard heavy trucks operate at 80,000 pounds on federal highways, and special permits can push that higher. In the European Union, the maximum for a standard articulated truck is 40 tons, which is roughly 88,000 pounds, with a limited exception of 44 tons for trucks carrying 40-foot intermodal containers. On paper, that sounds comparable. But in practice, the weight constraint matters enormously for electric trucks because battery packs are heavy. A Tesla Semi's battery system adds significant mass compared to a diesel powertrain. In the American market, that trade-off is more manageable. In Europe, where operators are working right up against that 40-ton limit, every kilogram of battery weight is a kilogram of cargo that cannot be carried. That is a direct economic hit on every load. Then there is the road network. European highways are older, denser, and more complex than American interstates. Urban delivery routes involve narrower streets, tighter turning radiuses, and infrastructure that was built long before anyone imagined trucks the size of Tesla Semi rolling through it. This is not an insurmountable problem, but it is a real one. The physical dimensions of the truck, the turning behavior, the height clearances, all of it needs to be validated in an environment that was not designed with American-style heavy trucking in mind. Driver regulations create another layer of complexity. In Europe, truck drivers are legally required to take a 45-minute break after every 4.5 hours of driving. That rule exists for safety reasons, and it is enforced seriously. On the surface, that sounds like an opportunity for charging, and it is, but only if the charging infrastructure can actually deliver enough energy in 45 minutes to make the next leg of the journey viable. That requires megawatt charging system technology, which enables roughly 700 to 800 kilowatt hours of charge in 30 to 40 minutes. The commercial rollout of MCS was expected in 2026. If that timeline holds, it aligns almost perfectly with Tesla Semi's European entry. If it slips, the entire fast-charging case for long-haul electric trucking in Europe slips with it. And then there's the competition. This is where the European test becomes genuinely difficult for Tesla in a way that has no American equivalent. In the United States, Tesla Semi entered a market where electric heavy trucking was essentially new territory. There were no established electric truck brands with thousands of units in daily operation. In Europe, that is not the situation. Volvo already has more than 3,000 electric trucks operating across the continent. Mercedes-Benz has the e-tron 600. MAN has the ETG-X. Scania, DAF, and Iveco all have competing electric platforms. These are not startups. These are companies that have been building trucks for European roads for decades, that have established dealer networks, trained mechanics in every major city, and relationships with fleet operators that go back generations. When a Tesla Semi breaks down on a German Autobahn at 2 in the morning, who fixes it? That question does not have a comfortable answer yet. One commenter who follows the European trucking industry closely put it plainly. Tesla has no service network to speak of for commercial vehicles, and commercial customers will not tolerate a truck being off the road for more than a few hours. In passenger cars, a 2-day service delay is annoying. In freight operations, it is a contract violation. European logistics companies operate on margins that do not absorb that kind of downtime, and they have suppliers who will answer the phone at any hour to keep their trucks moving. There is also the pricing reality. European electric heavy trucks currently sell for around 250,000 euros or more. That is already 2 to 3 times the cost of a comparable diesel truck. Now add Chinese competition. Chinese electric truck manufacturers are offering vehicles in the 80,000 to 120,000 euro range. That is not a small discount. That is a fundamentally different price point, and it is already putting pressure on every other manufacturer in the segment. Where Tesla Semi's European pricing will land has not been officially confirmed, but signals suggest it will be at the premium end of the market. That creates a very narrow target customer, the kind of large fleet operator who can justify the upfront costs through operating, economics, and who has the infrastructure and financial sophistication to make the numbers work. So why would anyone bet on Tesla Semi in Europe? The answer lies in a set of economic facts that have quietly shifted over the past 2 years, and that most people in the trucking industry are only beginning to fully absorb. Electric trucks in Europe are now, in certain corridors and use cases, genuinely cheaper to operate than diesel. Not marginally cheaper, meaningfully cheaper. In Germany, the combination of rising diesel costs, new road tolls on diesel trucks, and declining electricity rates for fleet charging has created a situation where electric trucks cost approximately 1,800 euros per month less to operate than their diesel equivalents. German truckers are also facing over 1,200 euros per month in additional diesel costs starting in 2026 due to new carbon pricing mechanisms. That is not a future projection. That is a policy already written into law. An analysis of real-world electric truck deployments across European routes found that on a France to Germany corridor, electric trucks delivered a 20% operating cost advantage over diesel. Even on the longest tested route, France to Romania, where public charging was necessary and the logistical complexity was highest, electric trucks still came in 7% cheaper to operate. These are not laboratory numbers. These are figures from fleets that put trucks on the road every day and track every euro. The energy efficiency data is equally striking. Real-world studies found that electric trucks consumed 65% less energy than the average diesel equivalent, and 53% less than best-in-class diesel trucks. Even more surprising, the actual driving ranges achieved by electric trucks in service were 11 to 19% higher than the ranges advertised by manufacturers. Operators were consistently getting more from their vehicles than they expected. That pattern does not usually describe a technology that is struggling. And here is a fact that reshapes the entire debate about whether electric trucks can handle European freight. 45% of all goods moved by road in Europe travel less than 350 kilometers per day. 350 kilometers. Most current electric heavy trucks offer 250 to 500 kilometers of range on a single charge. That means the range objection, the idea that battery electric trucks simply cannot do the job, is already obsolete for nearly half of all European road freight. The technical case for electrification on short and medium haul routes does not need to be made anymore. It has already been made by real trucks doing real work. This raises a larger question, one that goes well beyond Tesla. If electric trucking already works economically on the routes that make up nearly half of European freight, and if operating costs are already lower than diesel in key corridors, and if the regulatory environment is moving from encouragement to legal obligation with binding targets set for 2030, then why is diesel still at 93%? The answer is infrastructure. Grid connections for depot charging in Europe face queues of 18 to 36 months in 16 or more member states. The largest trucking companies in Europe want to electrify their fleets. Some of them have made public commitments to do so. But they cannot get grid connections fast enough to actually charge the trucks at their depots. The trucks exist. The economics work. The regulation demands it. And the grid is not ready. That bottleneck is the single most important variable in the entire European electric trucking story right now, and it has almost nothing to do with which truck manufacturer makes the best vehicle. So ask yourself, what happens when that bottleneck finally starts to clear? When MCS charging becomes available at scale? When the grid upgrades that are already in planning reach completion? The infrastructure gap does not close slowly. Grid upgrades tend to happen in phases, and when a phase completes, adoption can accelerate very rapidly. The companies and fleet operators who have done the preparation work, who have studied their routes, trained their people, and understood the depot energy management requirements, those operators will be positioned to move fast. The ones who have been waiting for a clearer signal may find themselves competing for a shrinking supply of diesel fuel capacity while their competitors are locking in long-term electricity contracts. This is the context in which Tesla Semi is entering Europe. Not a market that is resistant to change, but a market that is changing more slowly than its economics and regulations would suggest, because the physical infrastructure has not caught up yet. Tesla's advantage, if it has one, is that it understands energy infrastructure in a way that traditional truck manufacturers do not. The integration of Megapack battery storage at depot charging sites, the ability to use behind-the-meter energy management to reduce peak demand charges, the software tools for optimizing charging schedules, all of that is territory where Tesla has built expertise over years of operating its supercharger network and energy storage business. A European trucking depot that partners with Tesla is not just buying a truck. It is potentially buying an energy management system. Does that offset the service network gap? The pricing premium? The lack of established relationships with European fleet operators? Maybe not immediately. But it reframes the competitive question. Tesla is not trying to win on the same terms as Volvo or Mercedes. It is trying to win on different terms by making the total cost of ownership calculation so clearly favorable that the service and relationship gaps become acceptable. Trade-offs for forward-looking operators. Here is what you should be watching for in the next 18 months. The first signal will be which European fleet operators sign early agreements with Tesla. If the early customers are large, sophisticated logistics companies with strong balance sheets and internal energy management expertise, that is a signal that the premium value proposition is landing. If the early customers are smaller operators taking a speculative bet, the mainstream adoption story is still years away. The second signal will be MCS deployment speed. If megawatt charging infrastructure rolls out on the major European freight corridors on the timelines currently projected, the long-haul case for electric trucking in Europe becomes very difficult to argue against. If it slips, the window of diesel's practical advantage extends. Do you think European fleet operators will make the switch to electric trucks faster than the infrastructure can support them? Or do you think the grid bottleneck will slow everything down for years? The answer to that question matters more than any single truck specification. What is happening in European trucking is not really a story about Tesla. It is a story about whether the largest diesel-dependent transportation system in the developed world can restructure itself fast enough to meet the economic and regulatory pressures bearing down on it. Tesla Semi is one variable in that equation, a significant one, because of what it represents in terms of energy integration capability and because of the signal it sends to every other manufacturer about where the competitive frontier is moving. But the outcome will be determined by grid operators, by port authorities, by national governments implementing the Clean Corporate Vehicles regulation, by the Chinese manufacturers offering dramatically lower price points, and by the fleet operators who have to make irreversible capital decisions with imperfect information. The diesel era in European trucking is not ending because of any one vehicle or any one company. It is ending because the economics of running diesel have quietly shifted underneath an industry that built itself around assumptions that no longer hold. Tesla Semi entering Europe does not cause that shift, but it may be the moment when the industry is forced to reckon with how far the shift has already gone. For more on what is actually happening inside the industries that will shape what you drive, what it costs, and what the roads look like in 10 years, make sure you are subscribed. Because the changes that matter most are rarely the ones that make the headlines first.